Hi, I'm Janny
And hi, I'm Nicky, and we want to welcome you.
to Pocket Talk. And we're excited to invite you to this space, which we've called Pocket Talk. Pocket Talk, where psychotherapy meets spirituality at the leading edge.
Hi, I'm Nicky, and today I'm going to be talking with Janny about an article she's written which has received a great deal of interest. And the article's about the difference between empathising and identifying, and how knowing the difference can really help us. So, hi Janny.
Hi, Nicky.
So you've written this article called Take Two Empaths, which is a piece about the difference between an empath who identifies with other people's emotions and an empath who knows how to manage emotions and energy.
Yeah.
And I wondered, what made you want to write this particular piece?
I think because empaths get such a bad press, and there are so many articles, books even, YouTube clips. Empaths are everywhere being commiserated with and told what a terrible time they have.
Yes.
Being advised how to stay away from the world because the world is so overwhelming. And actually, we're not talking about empaths. We're not talking about empaths. We're talking about something very different.
Okay, so
We're talking about people who identify, not empathise.
okay, so it sounds like you wanted to write this piece because you wanted to try and make clear that there's a distinction, and we're not straightforwardly talking about empaths. That a lot of the articles are really talking about people who identify rather than empathise.
Yeah. And I think it's a really important distinction because I think when an empath understands what's happening and stands in their own power, they are unstoppable.
Okay.
And their ability to work with energy and change energy is immense. But before we become an empath, I guess, therefore, before we move on and become a light worker, we're usually identifiers. And and the difference is this. So when I used to train newbie psychotherapists, I used to explain the difference as so you have a lake, and in the middle of the lake somebody is waving their arms about, shouting and screaming in panic, shouting, "Help, I'm drowning."
Okay.
And on the lake side you have an empath and you have an identifier, and they behave quite differently. So the identifier shouts out to the person who's drowning, "Oh God, how terrible! Isn't this just terrible? What a nightmare! Hang on, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to swim over to you and I'll drown with you."
Okay, so they're full of panic.
They're full of panic, they're full of fear, they're feeling helpless, they're feeling there's nothing they can do. However, the empath stands on the lakeside. They don't jump in the water. They actually feel the panic coming towards them from the other person, and they exude calm. They hold the panic inside them. They hold the belief that this person can make it to the shore, but they know that in order for the person to get to the shore, that person needs their calm, their energy, and the person needs them to breathe in their panic and to breathe out calm.
So they both feel the panic.
They both feel the panic, but they deal with it very differently. One is feeling quite powerless and full of fear, and the other knows about energy, knows that nothing awful is happening, trusts that the person can actually get through the situation, and just has to manage the emotion of it. And the empath can help them to do that.
Okay, so the empath stays calmer, they receive the emotion, they feel it just the same as the identifier, but somewhere there's a stillness in them, the ability to manage that emotion.
Yeah, because the empath has done the work.
Okay.
The empath knows the difference. The identifier doesn't yet know the difference.
Okay, and so I wonder if that's a point at which I can ask you, how do you understand the difference between empathising and identifying? And you've sort of said some of it already, but I think it might be helpful for listeners to hear how do you understand the difference between empathising and identifying? So, what the world calls empaths and you're calling identifiers, I wonder if it would be helpful to think a bit more about how do you become an identifier? What
Yeah.
shapes and forms us into that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I meet lots of identifiers in the consulting room, and we all have the same kind of history. And I say we because I've been one too.
Okay.
And the kind of history that we have is that we've usually either been used by a parent who themselves found it very difficult to manage emotion as a container for our parents' emotions. So maybe we had an extremely anxious parent who found it very difficult to manage their anxiety, and without realising that's what we were doing, we would be a sponge that would actually absorb that energy and somehow would have to be expected to hold it and manage it. But because we're so little, because we're an infant or a young child, we don't know how to do that. So our whole body, our whole system is without boundaries, borders. We're just zinging with that energy, and we learn to be frightened of emotion.
Okay.
I think another way we become identifiers maybe is that we have to carry an awful lot of responsibility in the family. So maybe we have a parent who's ill, or there's trouble in the family in some way, and again we grow up feeling that's our responsibility. We see how everybody's troubled and suffering and struggling, and we feel guilty about that. Guilt is always present in what the world calls empaths, because empaths feel they must take on the world's suffering and try and make it better. Empaths feel responsible. And so I want to call these people identifiers. These people identify with the emotion that everybody else is feeling. They feel guilty, they feel that they must be responsible for it, that they must make it better. They're often very angry about that. They don't like it at all. But they don't realise that they're actually absorbing rather than transmuting the energy that they're receiving.
Okay.
And as a child, of course, we don't know how to do that. We just know that our body is zinging with somebody else's emotion. And we're...
And we may not even be conscious that that's what's happening to us.
Absolutely. We just grow up filled with fear and anxiety. And I think that's typically how we become identifiers.
And I wonder as well then if a child is even aware that those emotions may not belong to them. They may belong to other people around them.
I think not. I think the key thing about people who are identifiers is that they believe that all this is happening in them. They believe that it's their response to the world, and that's why they believe the world is overwhelming. They feel that they can't cope with being in the world. Whereas actually it's about realising that emotion is energy, and that what we receive all the time is other people's emotions, so other people's energy, and that if we can understand this isn't ours, and therefore doesn't have to be a threat if we understand it in the right way, then we can exist in the world very powerfully.
Okay. So I guess I was wondering, if a child is having to manage the emotions of the people around them as they grow up, what impact does that have on them? Because they're also going to have their own emotions. What happens to those?
Absolutely, they are. And I think that's where you get into the vicious circle where we become really terrified of emotions. So it's supposed to be the other way round. If you think of a mother who's calm and empathic and has a young baby, and the young baby is really distressed or really frightened, and they're crying with their whole body. You can see it as a baby, that an emotion fills the entire body, and they need help. And a tuned-in mother will pick the baby up and hold the baby against her, soothe that baby, and actually convey energetically to that baby that she can manage their emotions. She can manage all the fear, all the distress, and the baby can give it to her energetically. And the mother receives it energetically. And her calm and her confidence that it can be survived then transmutes that energy, so that when the baby receives it back, the baby calms.
Okay.
And so a baby growing up with a tuned in mother learns that emotions can be calmed, can be changed into something else, are just information and can be soothed.
And anybody can do that for a child, can't they? It's not just a mother.
Anybody, any caregiver, any adult, or even an older brother or sister who's learned to be tuned in and calmed. Anybody can do that. It doesn't have to be a mother.
Okay.
And I think if a child hasn't got that, so a child, let's go back to identifying rather than empathising. And if a child grows up with an anxious parent who can't manage their own emotions,
Yes.
or a caregiver who is so frightened of her child's emotions or his child's emotions that there's an emotional reaction inside the parent too,
Yes.
then the parent can't do what I've just described the mother doing with the baby.
Yes.
Instead, the parent amplifies it, exaggerates it, it grows bigger energetically,
Okay,
and
so
the child learns this is terrifying.
yes. So the child's feeling anxious, and then it's met by a wall of emotion of anxiety from the caregiver, the mother, the father, whoever that be. And so what you end up with is just an amplification of anxiety
Going straight back to the child, so
Yes.
the child gets a double dose, if you like.
Yes.
And I, you know, we then grow up to be an adult.
I can see that this would all be really overwhelming and frightening then for a child. And I guess the younger you are, the more frightening that would be to have those experiences.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could explain a bit about how a child survives and manages those experiences.
I mean, firstly, yes, absolutely, you're right, aren't you? That for a baby, an infant, a young child, emotions that aren't being contained and that they're not receiving help from someone older are terrifying, because emotions are physical. You know, we don't always understand that. Emotions are physical. They are physical sensations in our body.
Okay.
And if nobody's helping to calm those down, yes, they are terrifying. And so we employ a vast number of different defences to help us with those. And I think it's unhelpful to go through a long list, but maybe in terms of children, then the main ones might be, first thing we do, we suppress them, we numb them, we actually come out of our body into our head so that we don't feel them anymore.
Okay.
Something else that we do is that we split them. So we split them off, and we decide that some things are good, some things are bad, and we push the bad things right away in another part of our psyche, and we just hold on to the good. To try and make the world feel a safer place, really. But it means that the shadow bit of us, where all the bad bits are, is where all the terrifying aspects of the world are.
And of course, I think it's a quite common belief to believe that emotions are, that they can have good and bad labels.
Absolutely, and I think that's where it comes from. That emotion isn't just a physical reaction giving us information, but that there are good. Well, we muddle feelings and emotions too, but that there are good feelings and bad feelings, which are really good emotions and bad emotions.
Okay.
But I think the other two defences, perhaps, just before we move on to that, is that because a child needs the caregiver, even though the caregiver isn't really being able to give the child what they need, the child must hold the caregiver as good.
Yes.
So the child never ever thinks the caregiver isn't able to give me what I need. The child thinks there's something wrong with me. I'm failing, I'm getting it wrong. If only I did this, it would be better. If only I was more like that, it would be better. And so the child idealises the parent and denigrates themselves, say that what's going on is wrong with them. And that's how empaths, who I would call identifiers, end up feeling in the world, that actually there's something wrong with them.
Okay.
And that it isn't, that they're in a world where everybody else is busy splitting, suppressing, sending emotion out that they're picking up.
So it sounds like it's a protective mechanism that's learned in our early years that allows us to maybe survive some maybe difficult experiences in our early years.
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, defences get knocked a lot, like we shouldn't be defensive, but actually they are our survival mechanisms. We are amazing creators. We manage to create systems of defence that help us survive, and some of us, without those defences being in place, simply wouldn't survive childhood. And that's not, I'm not exaggerating, I mean it. We couldn't survive, we would go mad.
Yes. And it sounds, that sounds pretty bleak and horrifying. So it's absolutely essential that we have the capacity to put away the bits that feel overwhelming or frightening. And I guess then it becomes difficult when we are adults.
Yeah.
But we're still doing that.
And therefore I think there's a process as adults that we can go through where we learn to own again our emotions and learn not to be frightened of them. And then we become what I'm describing as an empath of enormous power, and who can be immensely helpful in the world because they become a light worker who knows that emotions are just vibration and energy, and that you can contain them and you can understand them and you can transform them.
So what actually happens when an identifier receives the emotion of somebody else?
As in, how does that physically or practically happen?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I guess we go back to the fact that this is a vibrational universe, and so everything is made up of energy, including emotion. So when we feel emotion, we are sending ripples of vibration out from us as energy whenever we are experiencing emotion.
Yes, yeah.
And because we are all energetic, we're all made up of energy.
Yes.
Then when one person sends out the energy of an emotion, we all have the capacity to receive that that energy, that vibration. And so when we say we're receiving the emotion of somebody else, we're actually, as an energetic being, we are receiving another's energetic communication.
Yes.
But then it gets more complicated, because if we go back to the conversation we had a bit earlier about children and defences and putting things away, so supposing we have put away feelings, emotions that we considered to be bad or dangerous.
Okay.
So we've learned that anger is frightening.
Yes.
And so we've put anger away in another part of us. But suppose we then receive from somebody else the energy of anger. So not only do we recognise it as the energy of anger, but that energetic blueprint of anger hits our own energetic system and finds the anger that we've put away in another part of us.
Okay.
And because we put that away because it was too frightening, when somebody else's anger finds our put away anger, then it actually feels immensely raw and frightening.
Okay.
And that's what's happening when people who are identifiers are walking through crowded streets or sitting in a cafe where they're receiving other people's vibrational communications.
So
that's then finding their own.
Yeah, so they're actually experiencing other people's emotions, but what the other people's emotions are finding the emotions that the identifier has learnt to put away.
Yes.
And this isn't a conscious process, is it?
No, it's totally unconscious.
And of course, those emotions that have been put away are going to be in their raw form, aren't
Yes,
they?
unprocessed. They've not been given language. They've never been thought about. They are just as they were in their original state when they were first put away. And that's why, until we come to understand what emotions are and how to manage them differently, thoughts alone won't do it. We do have to go to the emotion, and we have to learn to deal with that differently.
Because otherwise we're going to be assaulted constantly and find those emotions just brought up to the surface over and over again.
Yes, because what's assaulting us is not actually the other person's emotion only. What's assaulting us is the emotions we're frightened of, that we hold in our own energy system, that the other person's energetic communication is finding.
Yes. So if we haven't dealt with our own anger, our own grief, our own jealousy, or whatever, whatever emotion it is, then when we find ourselves with other people who are experiencing that, we're going to find that really intolerable, because we haven't ever had the help to be able to go close to and manage those emotions that belong to us.
Exactly that. And, we're using words like dealt with. And so when we say if we haven't dealt with our emotions, all we really mean is we haven't had the help of another to teach us that they can be survived, that actually we can just experience them as information of something that's going on inside us. And then that's back to the word containing or containment that I've used a lot in this discussion. And what that means is somebody else outside of us who knows that emotions can be survived, receiving our emotional communication, holding it, understanding it, calming it, soothing it down because to them it's not frightening, and giving it back to us in a processed form that isn't any longer frightening. And because it's not frightening, we don't have to defend against it and put it somewhere out of our view. To come back and bite us later.
So as any identifier actually needs to find themselves with a really sorted empath in order to work through their feelings.
Absolutely that.
So that all sounds like quite a process people would have to go through.
I guess it can be seen as a process, can't it? Because there are two parts to this, really. One is that we do have to examine all the stuff that we've put away in its raw state, and gradually realise that because it was raw when we put it away, it's always seemed frightening. But once we apply a bit of awareness to it, and we realise why it feels the way it is, we gradually come to understand that it doesn't need to feel that way anymore, and it doesn't need to be frightening because we're a grown-up now, and grown-ups can manage emotion. I think that's what's so important. Our emotion, largely, we were taught to feel afraid of it because we were too little to manage it.
Yes.
And it's remembering that we're a grown-up now and we can manage it.
Yes, that we can survive it.
Absolutely. So I think that's got to be the first thing, that we integrate everything. We let everything come back together. And I think the wonderful thing that happens when we begin to do that is gradually we develop the capacity to observe what's going on rather than react to it. We develop an observer self. We become the watcher rather than the reactor, which of course is what spiritually we are anyway.
Of course, yes.
But once we have that observer self, then we can become mindful, we can become calmer, we can become steadier, we can understand, and we can hold an emotion without becoming frightened of it, without running away from it. And of course we're talking about negative emotions here, aren't we? But that's the same with with pleasant or happy emotions.
Oh, which can be just as frightening.
They can be just as frightening, because we can feel out of control when we become ecstatic, or we can feel just as out of control with those if nobody has helped us to contain or manage them in the past. So I think becoming mindful is the second step, which is why there is such an awareness in the world today of the importance of mindfulness as a tool to remain steady in all situations, because we become the observer and not the reactor.
Yes.
We become the empath rather than the identifier, which is what this is all about.
So how do you think we move from being an empath that you'd call an identifier to an empath who you'd call a light worker?
Okay, well let's start in a slightly different place. Let's start by saying that empaths come into this world to become light workers. That absolutely everything that an empath has learned, known, experienced has brought them to this point where they are ready to do the work that will help them to become the light worker that they came here to be.
Yes. Yeah.
And that involves two different things, particularly.
Okay.
And I think the first is that we empaths who have grown up being identifiers have to learn that emotions can be survived, can be understood, are not terrifying. They are just communications energetically, one light being to another light being. And that because we are so sensitive to that energy, we pick it up wherever we go. The bit that we have to do is know that sometimes it finds our own stuff. And so because our own stuff is still frightening, we have to deal with our own stuff first.
Yeah.
And so the spiritual path does involve taking ourselves apart a little, discovering the bits that we've put into our shadow side, realising that they can join the rest of us, that there's nothing to be scared of, that actually it's all experience, and that experience helps us grow in compassion and in understanding for all other beings that are here with us on this planet.
Yes, absolutely.
And so we have to do the work. That's the work we have to do. And I think once we've done that work, we're no longer frightened of communication either from other people or from our own split off shadow side, the bits of our psyche that we've run away from up till now. And I think once we've done that work, then we're in a position where we can receive others' energy, we can hold it with compassion and with understanding, and with real empathy, not identifying, but empathising with real empathy. And we can hold it in a sacred space inside us until we've calmed it, soothed it, accepted it, and we can give it back, just like the mother or father or caregiver with a young baby.
Yes.
We can give it back in its transmuted form. And the other person
So it sounds like what you're saying is that this is a process, and it's a necessary process, and that the empaths that come into the world as identifiers choose to come into the world to have those difficult experiences that then leave them in the, with the potential to go on to become empaths who are light workers.
Exactly that. I think, we choose that journey. We voluntarily show up because we come with a purpose and a job to do. And I think we have to go through the experience of becoming identifiers in order to be aware of the emotions of the world, which we're going to go on to transmute as light workers once we've done the work. And I think maybe the other thing to say is that because everything is energy and everything vibrates at different frequencies, then the highest frequency of all is that of love. And when an empath has done the work and they've learnt to accept and understand and feel compassion for all emotion, all experience, including their own, then they do actually vibrate at the frequency of love. And I think vibrationally the reason this is important is because there's a physical law, the law of entrainment, which says that everything vibrates to the frequency of the highest vibration present. And that's exactly how Lightworkers transform piece by piece, ripple by ripple, the energy of their immediate environment and ultimately of the entire planet. We hold a high vibration, we've done the work, we can receive others' emotions, others' vibrations, and we can transmute them by holding them in our sacred space till we've changed them.
Janny, what would be your take-home message then for all those people out there who see themselves or are recognising themselves as the empath identifiers?
I would say start to realise how powerful you are. Start to realise you chose this. Start to realise you've been serving your apprenticeship. And that now you're ready to stand in your full power as a light worker who is ready to do the work and move on from doing the work to your real purpose, which is transmuting the energy of this planet. And think, wow, look at me. Who am I really? Here was I thinking that I was one of the sensitive people who had to hide away from the world. And now this is revolutionised. I don't have to hide away from the world anymore. I'm here to be in the world. And I'm here to be in the world as the most powerful being of light and love and power, here with a purpose that I now understand. Just watch me.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Janny. You've been listening to Pocket Talk with Nicky and Janny. If you have things you'd particularly like us to talk about, general questions or thoughts you'd like to ask or share, you can private message Janny and I via the Facebook page, The Therapist in My Pocket, www.facebook.com/TT in My Pocket, or you can email us directly at theterapistinmypocket@gmail.com.
You can listen to me, Janny Judley, on YouTube and SoundCloud as Janny Judley, The Therapist in My Pocket. And you can follow me at Janny Judley on Twitter and on Instagram. My latest book, Dances Amongst the Stars, is available on Amazon, and you can read more at www.theterapistinmypocket.com.
Janny's also a regular columnist with Elephant Journal and is writing for Kindred Spirit UK. If you'd like to read her pieces, you can find her as Janny Judley on www.elephantspirituality.com.
For now, thanks so much for your company and for showing up here to share this space with us. We look forward very much to receiving your thoughts and questions and suggestions, and to sharing many interesting and helpful discussions, tips and explanations to help us all on our spiritual journeys.
Thank you for listening
to Pocket Talk.